Hi, everybody. Welcome to Readers of the Lost Art. This is my good friend Stuart Shaw.
Hi
And
everyone, how are we doing today?
do you want to introduce yourself, Stuart? Everyone knows me, and much to their detriment.
Yeah, so I used to be one of Paul's old students, going back to, was it just about 2012 up to about 2015, when he was at the University of Leeds, in communication studies. So my background's in media and communications, but I have more than a passing interest in philosophy, especially continental philosophy. Martin Heidegger was someone I'm really passionate about. And philosophy of technology. So I'm actually at the moment in the process of starting my own channel, which is going to look at like kind of the aphoretic nature of the digital. So in the media at the moment, a lot of people are talking about digital media being bad, social media, the impacts on society and things like that as being quite negative. So Paul's invited me on kindly just to kind of like hold his hand while we go through this quite epic text, 4,000 pages of Marcel Proust. So
Yeah,
yeah, that.
yeah. If I can explain to viewers what we'll do in terms of, I hate that management phase moving forward.
Oh
So
no,
I
no,
won't
no,
use
no
that
measurement speed.
phrase.
No, very unproustian.
No. So in future, I don't understand why people just don't say in future. So in future, the plan is, and this is what I always believe plans. There's always a what's it? Always a
I,
slip twixt cup and lip.
I love it when a plan comes together.
Yeah, but they never do. But the way I foresee this working is each week at the no each for 1 and then 2 weeks. So each week for 2 weeks, Stuart and I do this format. We just chat about a close reading of the text. Then on the third week, I'll do one of my standalone videos and post it at 6 o'clock on a Thursday. And then in the fourth week, um, Darren McGee and Richard Grannon have nominally said they'll do a round discussion. And if Stuart's able to join, he will. But the onus isn't on Stuart to be part of that because, unlike me, he has a full and rewarding life and he has limited time and he can't do this stuff as much as I can. So just to repeat, this week it'll be me and Stuart and I. Next week it'll be Stuart and I. Then I'll do a standalone video that'll draw upon some of the discussion. And then in the fourth week, I can't guarantee it'll be on a Thursday because it depends on Richard and Darren. And because Richard's a cosmocrat, he's always swanning around the world. So I don't even know what time zone he'll be in. But if possible, it'll be the four of us having a good chin wag about it. And then the following month, it'll all repeat itself. And the idea is it's basically a middle finger to the algorithm. Because if we do a close reading, I started off saying we'd do 200 pages a time and we'd have a tight schedule. But it's not going to work like that. I'd rather do a really deep, slow read. And if we do it that way, again, who knows how long, but it could take 18 months. And I do fully envisage what will happen is I will be talking to myself with 0 viewers in 18 months' time, muttering incomprehensibly, and it'll be fun. So that's the plan.
Sounds it. Let's go. I remember readers like reviewers like and subscribe and all that.
I never say that because I'm not like you. I'm not
Well,
a cheap
that's the
internet
problem.
tart, Stuart. You floozy.
Just trying to
So
help
what's
out
your
Paul.
first? What's your first? Well, I invited you to read it, so I mean, I'm curious what your initial, apart from oh God, what's he on about? What was your initial response to the invite, and what's your initial impression of having read a bit of him?
Yeah, so obviously I knew Proust through, I guess, like third person in philosophy, just reading philosophy. You tend to find in a lot of journals and articles people talking about time. They talk about Proust all the time in literature a really good example of a text that deals with kind of, I guess, the transient nature of human subjectivity. So it was something I knew of just through passages, reading other people's work, and then yeah, you extended the invite, and I looked at it and I was like, bloody hell, this what's it, Guinness Book of Records, their longest novel, and I just thought it was incredibly anti YouTube. It was incredibly anti algorithm, like you say. It was audacious, and I just thought, yeah, that sounds like fun, and then let's give it a go.
Could you? You also haven't told what you said to me off camera was
Mm,
the initial bit. You know, when Marcel is in bed waiting for his goodnight kiss. I'm,
yeah.
I'm, I'm paraphrasing accurately. Your exact response was, What a little whiny mommy's boy. He deserves a damn good thrashing. Would you like to expand upon that for viewers?
I think that was you. I think there's a bit of what's about me there, Paul. No, my as a father, like reading that bit, it was quite funny, but I was at the same time thinking, God, like that's a really historically grounded approach to child bringing, in a sense. The first thing I thought was that, number one, that explains probably his health and his whininess. Number two, probably explains his homosexuality in real life. And number three, I just thought, no, that's not how people are brought up nowadays. So it was interesting. It was quite shocking in a way. That part of the book.
Yeah, could I jump on that point you've just made? Because so I think part of what puts people off the whole 6, 7 volumes, I tend to refer to it as 6 volumes
Yeah,
because the editions I have, but I think technically it's 7 volumes.
7, yeah,
Yeah. But what tends to put an awful lot of people off is there's an overture which we can talk about in a second, and then there's the bit where he's in bed waiting for his goodnight kiss.
yeah.
And I was, making fun of him being a whiny little mummy's boy. But it is a bit off-putting because it's so anachronistic to today.
Mm,
Children aren't that hysterical. That they've got, they're snotty and little goblins, but they're
agreed.
not
Yep,
like that.
that's
It's
right.
just it really is dated.
Yeah.
But what I find interesting is that I'm going to read you a bit in a second about how decadent the times were and how decadent Proust was to put this in context. But also, it really is an introduction to what happens in the rest of the 7 volumes, because he's got this overwhelming desire to be kissed by his mother, and there's lots of Freudian stuff there. But it's also the whole 7 volumes, to some extent, I'll argue as we go along, are about desire. And also not just desire, it's the desire of not getting what you want. And then there's lots of instances in the 7 volumes where people get what they want and they're still not happy.
Still not happy yet.
Yeah, because I've never got what I want. So, water off a duck's back to me. But this little whiny mommy's boy, he goes through, he's describing as an author all this stuff. And what I found hilarious is, in this day and age, I don't want to get all political, but there is such a thing as cancel culture. And I don't think Proust has ever been given much of a hard time. I think maybe he was gay. What else? He's writing a book that not many people ever read. But in terms of if you wanted to cancel him, I thought people might be interested in this. This is from I can't. I'm so people can see that.
Yep.
So it's a reader's guide, and it's actually very helpful. It basically gives for someone who's as senile as me, I keep forgetting who's who, and it just gives you it. Hello, who are you? It keeps giving you summaries, and it gives you précis of what's going on,
Yeah.
which is surprisingly helpful.
How
It
much?
also
Just
gives
to
you
stop
some
you there,
back.
Paul. How many characters are in the
Yeah.
book? Because I think it's broke a record for number of characters in a novel as well, or something like that. Number of actual characters that they talk about. Does your guide include that?
Yeah, it gives you the main characters, and there's 4 pages of main characters, just in a list. So yeah, in alphabetical order, and then there's a guide to the main characters, which gives a few paragraphs on each one. But I found this, and apologies to people because I have as Stuart can testify, I have a pathologically puerile sense of humour. It's sophomoric, isn't it, Stuart?
It is. Yeah, me too. So this could be a dangerous combination.
Well, there's a section in this reader's guide where Patrick Alexander, the author's name is, describes the drugs and sex that in Proust's life. And this is a quote. It's a letter Proust wrote to his grandfather when he was 17. So it's his grandfather, I think it was a grandfather. It's spelt with a W, but I'm guessing it's Vile or Weil. And he says, "My dear grandpapa, I'm appealing to your kindness for the sum." Oh, I need to give you the context. Basically, he was a raging onanist, was our Proust.
Yep.
And for people not familiar with biblical language, an onanist is basically a self-fiddler. Do you want to go any more technical from personal
I,
experience,
I've
Stuart?
I've
What do
got
you call yourself?
I've got the Viz, the Viz Profanosaurus, the dictionary of swearing. I'm sure we could spend the next hour going through synonyms for masturbation.
Well, yeah, basically, Proust likes his greatest love in his life was himself.
Yeah.
So his father got fed up of this and tried to persuade him not to interfere with himself for 4 days in a row, and that didn't work. So he sent him. He had the brainwave. This is a sign of the times.
Yeah.
He gave him 10 francs to go to the local brothel, on the basis this might get it out of his system. And this was the letter to his grandfather shortly after the visit to the brothel. My dear grandpapa, I'm appealing to your kindness for the sum of 13 francs that I would like to ask Monsieur Nathan for, but that Mamma prefers that I ask you for. Here is why. I so needed to see a woman to cure my bad habit of masturbating that Papa gave me 10 francs to go to a brothel. But first, in my agitated state, I broke the chamber pot, 3 francs, and second, in the same agitated state, I was unable to screw. So here I am, still awaiting each hour 10 francs to satisfy myself, and in addition, 3 francs for the chamber pot.
So he broke the chamber pot in the brothel, or he broke the chamber pot
Yeah,
in his house before the brothel.
no, I'm assuming it was in the brothel because they're asking
Well,
for him to pay. He had
like
to
you
use
do.
three of. Yeah, so I think he paid the 10 francs, couldn't perform, and he owes 3 francs for the chamber pot.
Was he in the
So
brothel? His communication so slow in those days. He was in the brothel and he had to write the letter, post it, wait for the reply a week later. Was this like after the fact? Did they let him off and give
I,
him a ticket?
they let him off, and then he wanted to go back, so he needed the money,
Can
and
you imagine
I
the
think he felt.
shame going back to a brothel with money because you broke the bog? Can you imagine the shame? That's a low point of anyone's life, Paul. That is poor guy.
Well,
Now we
I
know.
only
Now we
tell a
know why it
story.
was.
Yeah. And I only tell a story because people think, and because of the bit about if all you've read is a little boy wanting to be kissed by his mother,
Yeah.
you think how saccharine, how anachronistically innocent. And yet, what I do like about the novel is further on, there's quite depraved sections about masochistic behavior in brothels.
Yeah.
And I think that's what fascinates me, not masochistic behavior in brothels, I hasten to add, but the contrast, Proust's ability to talk about the extreme innocence of a little kid in bed and then the absolute depravity of the aristocracy in France in the Belle Epoque.
Absolutely.
It's an amazing range that he has.
Yeah.
And I would be curious as to how, because we were discussing this off camera, how many people, because they're put off by the little boy in bed bit, that is a bit draining. He is really annoying. I really don't like children. You will have, as a father, you'll have completely different attitude, I guess. But many people would be put off reading the book because of that. And we were discussing, weren't we, that if you actually think about how few people have read all 7 volumes, I sent a question to AI asking, which I rarely do, but I was asking, have more people run marathons than read Proust, the whole of it? And the AI said basically exponentially more because so few people actually finish all 7 volumes.
That's
And then I
right.
thought there's probably a lot more who've done Ironman competitions than actually read Proust.
I would say nowadays, yeah, yeah. I mean, you would need to look at the circulation. Obviously, when it first came out in France, I believe that the first volume it was self-published. Like he couldn't get a publisher at first, from what I understand, and he had to self-publish the first volume, and the first volume was a success. And then obviously he published subsequent volumes, but the last volumes it was his brother had to put them together, didn't he? So if you spread that over the time it was originally released and obviously translated into multiple languages, I mean, I don't think there's a single language where you can't get Proust. It's really famous. But as you say, in my own research, looking into how many people actually read the full novel, most people just read Swan's Way. And then
Yeah, and
even at
it's a real
universities,
shame.
that's right. Even at universities, up to a master's level, that when they do Proust, probably not in your time. I mean, probably when you were in university, it was a bit more rigorous, and it's like there you go. There's all 7 volumes. Read it by Monday, sunshine. But nowadays, yeah, they just do the first volume on most master's French courses.
Well, on that point, I'd like to develop that because we will get to the text people. Don't worry. But there's been various articles recently, and lots of universities are Mickey Mouse now. But at Oxbridge, the holy of holies,
Yeah.
there was an English literature professor saying that he can't get students to read a Dickens novel. That they get triggered and panicked because it's too
Mm,
much. And I did a course in, I've mentioned this before in a different format, but I did a Russian literature and history course that was an outside year long course at Edinburgh. So only half of the course was literature. And we were given to read War and Peace, Anna Karenina, most of Dostoevsky, and a slew of other writers. And that was in half a course.
mm,
And this goes to the point of no wonder people don't read Proust today, because that level of reading, if it's not expected of you, there's a lack of a positive reinforcement loop, isn't there?
yeah,
If people
absolutely.
aren't, if it's deemed to be impossible to do,
Yeah.
and then I don't know, we'll just finish on this one thing about why people don't read it, and an immediate response is it's just ridiculously long. But I've always thought about that in the sense, for example, people who go to the gym, the
Mm,
amount of time they spend getting ready, traveling to the gym, exercising, showering, coming back, traveling back. It takes huge chunks of people's days. And I reckon you could read all 7 volumes in a month if you read a couple of hours a day.
for sure. Yeah. Once you get
So
into the
why?
flow of it, I think. I mean, one reason I think a lot of people get put off, perhaps as well, is you look at pictures on the book, you look at the I guess the marketing, if you could even call it that, and I think people say, "Oh, it's Belle Epoque, it's out of date, it's old fashioned." Ooh, that's going to be really boring. The text is going to be really boring. But when you start reading it, it's like, wow, this is
So,
just it
so
flows
on
like a
that,
wave of you.
what was your first response to the language?
Fantastic, like riveting. I mean, obviously, like being used to reading academic papers, sentences that go on for 2 or 3 pages, exaggeration, but long sentences with multiple commas and m dashes and all sorts. It's like, yeah, that's not a problem. But the language he's using is very accessible. The language the translators are using is very accessible, and from what I understand about the original French version, is it's a very kind of playful, light, kind of flowing language. It's not heavy. It's not like, it's not like reading Heidegger getting bogged down every 30 seconds. So I found, as I was reading, I mean, I read a lot for pleasure, and I'm used to reading, relatively fast, but I was find that it would flow so well, but there'll be so many passages that was just like, ooh, you'd get the face like, ooh, that's nice, and I go back and read it again, and it was just intriguing, and I was like, it really helped to understand from your videos and other videos, and kind of prep a material that I read before, what to look for. So as I was reading, I knew what was significant, and then I knew what he was talking about roughly. But in terms of the quality of the language, from the translation, what I'm using, the Moncrief translation and the Enright revisions, I don't know why people will be put off by the perceived difficulty of the text. Uh, I think anyone could read this. I think anyone who's past high school level could read it. I don't think it's there's probably some historical references that you would need to maybe check up if you want to really get the most out of it. He might suddenly start talking about something that you need to go and look at and say, okay, how does this relate to 19th century France? But it's a very accessible book. So I would suggest
If
anyone who hasn't read it, don't be worried about the difficulty of the text.
Yeah, if I could just talking about that, if that's the copy I'm reading. And if money isn't an object, if you're not on a budget, the William C. Carter, it's a very slightly revised version of the Enright. And to Stuart's point, there are notes in the annotated notes in the margins, so you don't have to look anything up at the back. And
Yeah,
then on
super
pages
useful.
where there aren't notes, you've got loads of room to make your own notes. So the annoying thing is, all 3 volumes, the first 3 volumes are in paperback and available. The annoying thing is, the next 3 volumes, at least at the moment, are only available in hardback. But if you want to buy, my recommendation, so I think Stuart's got the hardback of the Everyman.
Yeah, So the Everyman one, it comes out. I've taken the dust jacket off, but it basically comes in 4 volumes like this in a like a wooden box, and the paper quality is really good. I mean, I think this cost me about £60, so it'll be about $70, $65. The quality of the printing is fantastic. Sometimes you get these like editions which are like very poor paper, and you can't make notes on them. You can't write in the book. But I think the only thing is the margins, they're not big, so I kind of have to
Yeah.
make notes off on a different system.
And then
But
just my final
go ahead.
recommendation is this is the God. Well, I can't work out left and right, and I know, so I keep putting it in the wrong. This is the modern library version, which
That's
the
the
modern
paperback
library's
one. Yep.
yeah, and it's all 6 volumes for about in proper UK real money. It's just over 50 quid. In fake American, dollars, whatever they are. I'm not quite sure, but normally it's normally pound for dollars, isn't it, or close.
Yeah, I think it is
But
now. Yeah.
I recommend that if you haven't got that, if you're on a bit more of a budget for 50 odd quid to get all 6 volumes, and it's decent quality. I
Yeah.
like Modern Library. But
Yeah.
anyway, to dive in,
Let's jump in,
so
as they say.
it's it's it starts off and it's described as an overture,
Yeah.
and not in every edition. So in my edition, it actually says overture, and throughout the 7 volumes, there's this Monsieur Venture. My pronunciation of French is awful. It's Venteuil. So I don't think you get "tu" at the end. But he creates. He's basically a small scale music teacher, and he creates this piece of music that features throughout the 7 volumes. And that, I think, ties the whole 7 volumes together, because there are various themes in this opening overture, so to speak, that run throughout the rest of the book. I've already mentioned desire,
Mm.
but it's like a refrain that comes through. And again, it's my disappointment, because so few people read all 7 volumes, they're never going to see that beautiful pattern. And the age we live in, no one's got the time to do it, no one's got the stamina. But the very beginning, so for a long time I went to bed early. Sometimes when I put out my candle, my eyes would close so quickly that I had not even time to say I'm going to sleep. And it continues with, it's unclear who precisely is in bed. It's the narrator, Marcel. And that's something else to talk about as we go along, the
Yeah, it's
complex
really
role of the
important.
narrator. Because the narrator is sometimes the young Marcel, sometimes the older Marcel, and sometimes it's from the point of view of Monsieur Swan, sometimes it's an omniscient narrator. The way in which the narration flows in and out. So, for example, it's a book about memory in lots of ways. My memory from years ago of having read this, I thought the lying in bed as a young boy moaning about the kiss from his mother was the very beginning, and it isn't. There's a good 15 pages or so where it's all about anyone or the narrator at various ages, I think, lying in
Mm.
bed, being disorientated. And I also find it very interesting at the very first sentence, you get the sense he's been asleep and he's been reading and he's fallen asleep with a book in his hand. So there's an immediate point there to the act of reading, the act of being disorientated by reading. Over to you.
Yeah, I mean, when I first read it, I had to reread the first 50 pages twice, actually, just because partly I was kind of blown away by it, and how he's introducing not just the kind of, I guess, the metaphysical background of the novel, what he's trying to say in terms of time, and what he believes how time contributes to who we are. Uh, but it's that sense of the way he's jumping between different characters that we don't really know at first who it is. It's not just like, hello, my name is Marcel Proust, and welcome to Swan's Way. He kind of like phases in, and for me it was a bit like, you talk about, it sounds like somebody reading a book before they go to sleep. What I got a sense of this was like an older man. This was like Proust looking back through time, remembering events of desire, but also I felt a kind of a twinge of melancholy, a twinge of sadness, all of a sense of like, did this happen? Did my life happen? And there's this feeling of a discombobulated soul or a body at first, at the start of the overture, in the first couple of pages, thinking like, what, who am I, where am I? And elements are brought in, just like flashbacks, memories, almost like in a kind of a dreamlike state. And the way he does this through language is very similar to how you would feel if you're having a dream, you fall asleep. I mean, many people don't remember their dreams, but for those of people who can remember their dreams, it's like this. It's like if you look at some of these AI videos nowadays where they kind of morph between different things, that's the best way to describe sometimes a dream. And I think he's doing this through language. One minute he's this old man looking back, one minute he's the younger Swan. He's dreaming of his mother. Then he's Mr. Swan. But what I found interesting is he starts bringing in physical elements from the room, objects from the room. And these objects start to mean something in terms of memory. And I guess this foreshadows the Madeline in terms of he's pushing forward this idea that memory, real proper deep memory, is linked to objects in a sense. And it's a very disorientating, first 20 pages that suddenly focuses and condenses, and then you kind of start more in Combray. But it's just incredible how these little pieces put in. He's in bed, he's a jigsaw, and you don't know if it's a guy thinking, this is me before I die, I'm remembering, or is this, like you say, it's a younger person remembering where he is. And it's probably happened to everyone at some point in their life. Like you wake up sometimes in the morning a bit disorientated, and where am I? And slowly you as the self gets pieced together and brought together. Uh,
No, I think your point, I hadn't quite thought of it in those terms, but what I love about the beginning is it starts off in such abstract terms. You're disorientated, you don't know what your state of consciousness is. And I had in my notes De Chirico. I've done a couple of videos on my channel with Giorgio De Chirico, who's this really atmospheric painter.
mm,
And he does shadows, and he does there'll be a train in the background, but there'll be classical buildings, so they're deliberately anachronistic. The time scale is messed up, and it's the atmosphere. The way he describes waking up, he feels he's in a dark place. So if I
yeah,
can just read a bit, he says, so the sense of confusion, this impression would persist for some moments after I was awake. It did not disturb my mind, but it lay like scales on my eyes and prevented them from registering the fact that the candle was no longer burning. Then it would begin to seem unintelligible, as the thoughts of a former existence must be to a reincarnate spirit. The subject of my book that he'd been reading, that is, would separate itself from me, leaving me free to choose whether I would form part of it or not, and at the same time my sight would return, and I would be astonished to find myself in a state of darkness, pleasant and restful enough for the eyes, and even more perhaps for my mind, to which it appeared incomprehensible, without a cause, a matter dark indeed. So he's describing consciousness. And you and I have both, most people are lucky enough not to have read Heidegger, but you and I have read a lot of Heidegger and philosophers of consciousness, which I'm reading a lot more about recently,
yeah,
Daniel Dennett and people. And I've also read some scientific papers that have engaged with Proust to see how scientifically accurate it is. And then you get into this fascinating bind whereby scientists are describing how scientifically accurate his perception of consciousness is. But the way he's describing it is how human beings actually experience things. The
yeah, absolutely.
scientists are the ones truly abstracting
Mm,
because no one experiences consciousness like the scientists describe.
yeah, I think that's an important point, Paul. I think that there's a basically a different, I guess, like teleology or reason why a scientist and an artist like Proust is doing this. Proust is trying to understand it in the sense of like what who he is within this process, which a scientist is trying to quantify it and objectify it and kind of say these are the key points of consciousness. And I think Proust does it in a such a way because he's relaying the experience through language. He's communicating the experience without trying to explain it. He's trying to bring us into the experience. And like you say, I think he does it in such a incredible way. For the book to start like that, if people who want to read this, if you're not hooked by those first 10, 11, 12 pages, then you'll know straight away that the book isn't for you. But I think most people would read this. Most people with even a passing interest in literature are going to read these first few pages and think, wow, this is not what I expected. I thought some, high society arty farty novel, but it's like, this is like straight into the meaning of existence.
And then another aspect of it I like, and can you like back after I've said what I'm about to say, will you try and please salvage it for viewers,
I'll
because it
try my
just makes
best.
me sound that just makes me sound like I need to be locked up.
Yeah,
But it's I love Proust's cruelty. There's an element in which later on there's a Baron de Charlus who he's a very active gay guy, and he has very complicated interaction, if I can put it euphemistically, with a bus driver. And part of the
it's a
cruelty is,
Carry On film, isn't it? On the buses,
yeah,
Carry On
yeah.
on the buses.
But as part of his interaction with this bus driver,
Yeah,
to heighten his sexual pleasure, as they're in, he actually asks the bus driver, will he not pick up some old ladies in the street and pretend he hasn't seen them? So these little old ladies are missing their last bus home.
yeah,
And the Baron gets a frisson from this. And in that, why I mentioned that was, apart from my have a sick sense of humour, I found that very funny. He describes, when he expands upon this notion of lying in bed in the darkness, he compares
yeah,
it to being an invalid who wakes up in the middle of the night and thinks it's dawn because they can see a light under the door,
yeah. I remember.
and then realize the light gets turned off because it's a servant putting the lights out the last thing at night. So they're in pain and discomfort, and they have to spend the rest of the night until dawn not being able to sleep and in pain.
Disorientated. Yeah, yeah,
And he writes it so that's for a normal person, like people feel, oh, for someone like me, I just see the underlying cruel humor.
yeah.
And I think there's a cruel humor throughout the book. That's
Absolutely.
I mentioned earlier the contrasts with this little whiny mommy's boy,
Yeah.
and I find the
And
contrast
it jumps out.
fascinating.
So suddenly there'll be a passage or a couple of pages will be like, oh yeah, this is happening, this is happening. Suddenly, bang, something crazy. I mean, maybe we're foreshadowing a future video, but I think it's about 120 pages in. Is it Françoisie, the maid? They have this long-standing maid, and he views her, or he thinks of her as this very loving, warm, nice person, and then he sees her killing a chicken for dinner, like trying to hack its head off or slit its throat or something. And she's like, bloody creature, evil creature, like this. And suddenly he's like, but he says it in such a funny way, like it's almost like humorous, like he thinks it's a bad thing, but he's like laughing about it at the same time. So yeah, I see that.
And I also think it's this the contrast. It's not just me finding it amusing, or there is that,
Yeah,
because I need help, as we've established. But there's also I think it's true of Victorian times. So I'm obviously much more familiar with English literature from the Victorian era, but there was always this
yeah,
thing in Victorian times where they were paranoid about sexuality. So
mm,
they'd have piano legs covered up because they didn't want to offend ladies because they looked like naked legs.
yeah,
But they'd also be childhood prostitution
mm,
amongst the nobility.
yeah,
So you've got this weird clash between this excessive, what's the word, propriety.
mm.
Everything is so on the surface ethical, and just scratch the surface. There's this seething, horrible. How to describe it? Just, but
It's like the
quite
macabre almost. Yeah, I mean, Victorian times were known for like freak shows, circuses, carnivals, kind of this under the surface, almost like cruelty in a way of being obsessed by the dark side, but it was hidden in a sense. It wasn't. There was this kind of an air of purity, but at the same time, this I guess like dark side.
And I think there's a phrase in, I don't know whether you remember the phrase, there's a phrase in Adorno where he says the culture industry is pornographic and prudish, whereas good art, true art, is ascetic, ASCETIC,
Mm,
ascetic and unashamed.
yeah,
And it made me think that we live in a time where the culture industry or Hollywood or online media, everything's pornographically in your face. But it's coincided with the woke mind virus, and everyone's offended by everything. So you can look back on Victorian times and find the disjuncture between the excessive politeness and the rampant cruelty just below the surface.
Yeah.
But we have our own bizarre, juxtapositions of
Yeah.
very odd things.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I mean, I think it comes to the crux of it. I mean, that's kind of how society and culture works. You always got to have this, I guess, like dialectical opposition, because you have one approach or one idea, and there's always going to be a space for the antithesis to kind of develop. But I think what happens is to deny there is that dialectic, to deny there is that antithesis, and not try and understand that is part of the problem, especially nowadays.
Yeah, and this idea that what I've just described, this clash between the proper and the improper, as he's been describing, lying in bed, as we've discussed, feeling disorientated. This paragraph says, sometimes too, just as Eve was created from a rib of Adam, so a woman would come into existence while I was sleeping, conceived from strain in the position of my limbs, formed by the pleasure that I was on the point of enjoying. She it was, I imagined, who offered me that gratification. My body, conscious that its own warmth was permeating hers, would strive to become one with her, and I would awake. So he's having pervy dreams in the
He's
middle
having
of
a
all
wet dream
this.
there, isn't he? Yeah, yeah. He's thinking about these discombobulated people and disabled people getting tortured by lights, and then he's like, oh, it's
Yeah.
pervy.
And then he goes on to say, and what I also like is, so there's little set pieces where his descriptions are brilliant, but then he has throwaway lines that are quite flippant. And all the way through the book, I've made notes. But he
Yeah,
has throwaway lines, and one of which is just this: people, he says, imagine that they can taste in reality what has charmed their fancy. And he's basically saying, no, you can't.
mm,
So that's a very early throwaway sentence that basically prefigures one of the major themes of the whole book: is people think they know what they want.
mm,
And throughout the 7 volumes, it's like a paean to the pointlessness of desire.
yeah,
And yet we can't help being desirous creatures.
yeah.
I found the answer to life because all I need is Nigerian Guinness and 2 Staffordshire Bull Terriers. Um, but most people have bigger desires names. But it is interesting that he's also written that from the perspective of a heterosexual man. So you've got the added repressive layer that he can't write truthfully.
Mm,
Although later on, it's quite, explicit gay literature.
yeah.
So there's lots of tensions going on. And by the way, before I forget, in the brothel, the letter to his grandfather, apparently when Proust himself did go to brothels, he went to male brothels.
Yeah.
He would take a photograph of his mother. Or there were photographs. I think he was an investor in one of them, and he had a framed portrait of his mother in the brothel as some type of, I don't know what the psychodrama behind that would be.
Is there a point in the book? I mean, this is in a later volume. I remember reading about a scene in a book. There's like a lady of high standing in the book, and she puts a photo of the husband or puts a photo of a relative up while she's making love to somebody, and then they spit on the
It's
photo.
later on. Yeah, it's later on, and it's really sad. It's Von
Could that be
Trier, the
related to that
composer.
then? Yeah, it's almost
That's
like
what I'm
he's
suggesting. Yeah, I didn't want to mention that because that's later on. You're just plot spoiling git.
spoiling the
But
plot.
now you have that scene is a lesbian scene, and she's the
Ah, right.
daughter
Yeah.
of the composer, whose biggest sin, and this is again something as a parent you might relate to, not a
Mm,
lesbian daughter, but the fact that the biggest sin this father has committed, if anything, is loving his daughter too much.
yeah.
So at that time, lesbianism would be a terrible social faux pas, to use the correct French term.
Mm,
And he, despite the social, and I'm not using this term lightly, but the social embarrassment of that time would have been great. And that didn't bother him because he loved his daughter. And the daughter doesn't seem to be able to handle the fact that her own father loved her that much. So
yeah.
she's having this lesbian tryst, and she encourages, I've forgotten which one of them, spits on the photograph
Mm,
of the father. And Marcel, as a young boy, witnesses this through a window which is slightly unrealistic. But anyway,
Mm-hmm.
but that brings home to me there's lots of nasty people in the book, but
Yeah.
Von Trier is this wonderful man, and people can't even handle being loved too much.
Yeah.
So, in that sense, it's quite a dark description of human experience because there isn't really anything that works
Yeah.
emotionally. It's all a bit crap, really, which isn't the most articulate phrase I've ever uttered.
No, but
But
I get your point. I get your points about it. You do sense, even from the first just over 100 pages that I've read, he's really trying to hammer home that people are not who we fully see, and at the same time, sometimes we see in people something that they're not, in a sense. So it's kind of that like the instability of the self, not just from how an individual thinks of themselves. It's from how perspective of an outside party sees them, and he is quite at times, like you say, dark and negative about it.
yeah, I was just looking because it's later on, we'll get to it eventually, but there's a section where he actually, to back up what you've just said, he actually says that when you see someone's face, I think it's when Monsieur Swan is coming into the garden,
Mm,
and he uses that an excuse to talk about when you see someone, you're not really seeing them in a scientific, visual, accurate way.
yep.
You fill in their face with all your memories of that person and all your previous interactions. And and the more I've read of philosophy of consciousness recently, like modern stuff,
Mm,
really recent cutting edge stuff, that's for example, Daniel Dennett had this idea. He called it multiple draft theory. He
mm,
basically says the way we process information is lots of different parts of our brain run in parallel, and we experience reality that way. In our brain unifies these disparate experiences, and at the end of the process, you experience it as a unified person.
yep.
But what actually, insofar as we can try and understand the mechanics of it, it's a very disparate process. It's not unified at all.
No.
And this idea of describing how you see someone's face and how you project onto their face loads of emotional input, given that he's writing this in the early 1900s, is quite incredible how perspicacious he was.
Yeah, talking about the milieu in which he's writing, just to touch it very quickly, I read today that Bergson, Henri Bergson, was married to his cousin, and
Proust was the best man at his wedding.
that's right. And there's been a bit of a debate within academic circles as to how much of Bergson is actually in his novel. Uh, I think he inverts a lot of what Bergson is saying, and he goes his own way with it. And he's actually said, I think he did an interview just before the final volume was published. No, that I think the final 3 volumes were published posthumously, but he did an interview with Le Monde or some journalist. I've got it written down. I'll just check my notes while we're talking. And he said, no, it's not quite right. And I think Bergson as well said, I think there's a quote that Bergson said, "Yo, a nice guy. He lent me some wax earplugs once, or something like that, to kind of like disconnect himself from Proust." But it,
Yeah, I think
there's a lot of parallels. Go
my
ahead, Bob.
understanding was that the major difference between them was that Proust suggests that involuntary memory is the strongest component or the most emotionally effective.
Yeah.
Whereas Bergson's idea was that we could actually work harder and consciously retrieve things.
That's right. Yeah, there was a bit of agency
What
there. So yeah, Proust himself said, "My work is based on the distinction between involuntary and voluntary memory, a distinction which not only does not appear in Monsieur Bergson's philosophy, but is even contradicted by it." So that's from Proust himself.
But to push back against Proust, I made this comment in one of my own videos. So I'm now citing myself, which I think is the acme of pomposity. But Proust reminds me of Plato, which is an extra. Let's ladle on the pomposity now.
Yeah,
I don't know about you, but what annoys me about people's interpretations of Plato is they always take him so bloody literally.
yeah, you said
So,
this, yeah. Mm.
yeah, so for people who haven't seen me say it, Plato wrote things like the Republic, and he claimed in the ideal Republic poets would be banished. And yet, within the Republic, he tells stories like the allegory of the cave, and he presents dramatic dialogue. So he's presenting it, the actual medium in which you experience his philosophy
Mm,
is actually poetic. It's dramatic, it's theatrical. So he's, in the way he writes, he's actually contradicting his own purported message. Now,
yeah.
I think Plato was more than capable of understanding the irony of it. But likewise, I cite an article that analyzes Proust and how he touches the whole concept of memory. And despite the fact Proust says he's writing about involuntary memory, in the act of writing 7 volumes, this is a highly intelligent, beautiful writer consciously recreating the whole concept of memory whilst presenting it as an involuntary thing.
Mm.
So what I'm arguing is he's contradicting himself, but I think he was fully aware of the contradiction as well, or if he wasn't, it's quite ironic.
Absolutely. That's actually quite a good point. What I would say about that is it's almost like he's prioritizing this involuntary memory in the sense that I guess technical memory, which you could say language is a form of techniques and it's a form of recording. So one of the earliest forms of recording. But I think the difference that Proust is kind of saying about involuntary memory is it's not just recall, it's like full body recall. It's not just memorizing information, it's senses, and he almost kind of puts it in almost like euphoric terms, like it's a spiritual experience, it's a transcendental experience. And he talks about the Madeleine. I think the few sentences after the Madeleine, he's trying to recall, he's trying to use images, he's trying to recreate that feeling that he got the original kind of experience in involuntary memory with the Madeleine, and he can't, and he's trying to push it, and then he realizes, no, this is almost like a transcendental experience. You've got to sit back, you've got to let it happen. We have no control over it. And it's almost goes back to the idea about desire and why desire is so important in the novel. He's desiring this experience, but it's not something that he can force, and that seems to frustrate him. You can feel a bit of frustration and almost like anger there. It's like, why can't I recreate this at the drop of a hat? Why can't I do this when I want? And then it becomes
Well,
something
also,
elevated for
yeah,
him.
the point I always make about that is desire by its very nature is a positional concept.
Mm,
So in order to desire something, there has to be a gap between you and the thing being desired.
yep.
So I'm about, when we finish this, I've got a fillet steak that's marinating at the moment.
Yummy.
And by the way, can I do a little pep talk for the power of MSG? Because everyone thinks MSG is bad for you. It's
It's not.
actually,
No, I've got some in the.
no,
It's, yeah, some of the proper Japanese one of the original company
yeah.
that makes it in Japan. Yeah.
Well, also it's like, I think it's if you use a third of the amount you would of salt,
Yeah.
MSG achieves the
Reduces
same taste.
sodium. Yeah.
So you're reducing sodium. But anyway, not that I go off on tangents at all. But the point I was going to say about desire, the minute I've stuffed my face with a really good organic grass-fed fillet steak,
Yeah.
I don't desire that steak the same way.
That's right.
And this is, in order to desire, and this is what most artists are very good at, is writing about the tension needed to keep desire alive.
Mm,
And the minute you get what you thought you wanted, you realize you didn't want it after all because
yeah.
you've got it. It's this eternal paradox going round in circles.
That's right.
So any economy, whether psychological or actual literal economy, it's premised upon a false need.
Mm,
And it's also part of the human condition, so therefore it's not a false need. And
yeah.
I think most great artists sense this in some way, and they're very good at writing about the ultimate paradox.
We talk about now in kind of modern terminology. You know, the dopamine fix and the dopamine cycle is just the latest version of this idea of wanting you have a quick fix and suddenly you feel disappointed, you feel deflated, and then you're chasing that next fix, and it's just desire. It's a rehashed version of desire.
One of the things you mentioned about, the physicality aspect,
Mm,
later in this section, there's a thing about when he sees the kaleidoscope. So I think his parents give him a kaleidoscope to make him feel less lonely when he's lying in bed.
It's called a magic lantern or something like that, isn't
Yeah,
it? It's yeah,
but it's
it's
basically it has a
like a,
kaleidoscope effect because the light
that's it.
goes onto the ceiling,
Yeah,
and he sees these characters from literature.
yeah,
And that was another thing, if you remind me later on, this concept of cultural memory. All the way through the 7 volumes, there are references to literature, there are
mm,
references to artworks all the time. And in our day, you can't get those references because we don't live in a literate culture.
that's
We
right.
don't live in a culture that values high art. So, in a very practical way, how you engage with reality and how you make metaphorical linkages is deprived to us. We're technologically much more advanced, but we actually lack the richness of the cultural memory
Mm,
that is contained in a book like this. But that's one thing, the cultural memory. The other thing was, you mentioned the physicality. He describes how this magic lantern, these characters from literature, start inhabiting. They actually can be seen on the doorknob, for
it's the doorknob.
example.
Yeah, the Golo, like this character of Golo from I guess like Teutonic uh night play or something like that, isn't it? So, something like that. It's like historical.
But I thought that was a genius way of explaining the way in which images can come alive. And
Yeah.
also, images by their nature are insubstantial, but he finds a very clever way of giving them body.
Mm,
So the image is superimposed upon the physical doorknob.
yep.
And that has advantages and disadvantages because that leads young Marcel basically initially complains about this because he
Mm,
said he'd taken a while to become very familiar with the room. And the minute this magic lantern is introduced, it alienates him from the comfort of his own room.
yeah.
And in future weeks, one of the topics we can maybe discuss, it'll come up anyway. But in an essay that Samuel Beckett wrote about Proust, one of the key themes Samuel Beckett explored was the concept of habit and the way in which habit allows us to orientate ourselves in the world.
Yeah.
And when you talk about the physicality, Marcel talks about the physical environment of his bedroom that he got used to.
Mm,
And I think it links to, you're very familiar with Heidegger's notion of ready at hand and present at
I have
hand.
that in my notes. Yeah, that's the first thing that came to mind when I was reading about
Yeah,
this.
do you want to explain that to viewers? You can do it better than I can.
Well, I'll try. It's so listen. Let me get it the right way around. So present at hand is something that you is like an object. For example, it's a pen. It's present. It's in the room. It's something that I can see. Whereas something that's ready at hand is an object infused kind of with a usage. So, for example, if this pen is ready at hand to write, and in the act of writing, the pen kind of gets melded into the usage in a sense.
I
So
think,
so
doesn't the example,
um,
sorry to interrupt, doesn't the example he give
it's a
is
hammer.
about, for example, yeah, someone's in a workshop,
Yeah,
and the point is when you're doing a technical job, you reach for the hammer instinctively.
yeah.
So it's ready to hand. Whereas when you look at the hammer amongst everything else in as part of a workshop, it's present at hand because it hasn't become an organic part of what you need to do.
That's right. Yeah, and that's right. And I think taking from Heidegger, if people are really interested in this concept, I would look at Bernard Stiegler, another a guy called Gilbert Simondon, both French, and they take this idea that the object and the human becoming distinct from each other. When it's in use, you no longer have human and hammer. You have basically an amalgamation. I think some would say like a kind of a cyborg of it being used, and the hammer itself is, I guess, subsumed by the process. The human itself is subsumed by the process.
But why that I need to make clear to viewers why that matters is that what I'm suggesting is huge swathes of the 7 volumes are all about habit and the way in which in our everyday life, life is experienced as ready to hand.
Yeah.
Life is experienced as a form of habit. We don't, you only, for example, let's say I would once famously smashed up a toaster like Basil Fawlty because it wasn't working. And in that act of violence, I hate objects that defy me. So I'm beating 9 bells out of a toaster, and that made that toaster very pertinent. I was observing every insubordinate plastic bit of this horrible toaster that was defying me. It was one of these modern ones with all these, programs, and it wouldn't just bloody toast.
Yeah, it
So
was
I just
burns or
lost
doesn't
it.
cook.
Yeah, and I thought, this is a hyper technological toaster that doesn't do the bloody basics, and that is when I was aware of the toaster. Normally, the toaster is just an everyday part of your life,
Mm,
but that, in the context of his novel, that raises huge questions. So I'm suggesting, this is a very long-winded way of saying, his concept of involuntary memory is when things suddenly become present at hand,
that's right.
when you've spent.
I think in my notes I put it in terms of like it's when a habit is broken. So a habit, in a sense, blocks out analysis. A habit blocks out kind of your vision of what's happening. But when the habit is broken, so for him, be tasting the tea, or if he's waking up in this strange room, the object becomes present at hand again. Suddenly, it's you're fully aware of the object in itself, as opposed to the object in a use case, or the object being used.
But why I wanted to think about this was the notion, if you bring all this up into today, 2026, it is 2026, isn't it?
I hope
Every
so.
time
Yeah,
in
I think so.
January, and no, I just struggle to remember which year changed. But what I found interesting about the book is he's talking about all these issues about what we're describing as present at hand versus ready at hand.
Yeah.
But I don't know what you think, but the number of times he's describing psychological processes, but he does it in very embodied physical ways. So even when he's just talking about his childhood bedroom,
Mm,
he talks about a wild currant bush coming through the window.
mm,
And it struck me that that's something that's missing. I appreciate he's in Combray, which is like a rural area, but it's part of the nostalgic tone of the book. It's about the way in which kids today, or most adults, you'd be struggling if you could name three or four plants, most urban dwellers.
yeah.
Never mind have a wild currant bush coming through your window. And the way in which, very early on in the first few pages, he's talking about the feeling of being alienated and not knowing where you are. And he compares it to a dark night, and you see a lantern, you've been out for a walk at night. Or he
Yeah.
talks about being out at night with moonlight.
Yeah.
And again, how many people go wandering now in the countryside and moonlight? It's a
Mm,
whole experience of the natural world or your physical environment
yeah.
that increasingly has been replaced by an online life.
It talks about memories being like captured in objects, doesn't it? At some point, it talks about memories being captured, like it's the soul of something captured in a physical thing. It's like a memory being trapped in a plant. So it's probably why he has a lot of these images of plants. It's not just Hawthorne. He talks about this like is it a chestnut tree in his garden that he reads under. He gives very vivid descriptions of the natural world. He talks about ravens or rooks, a type of crow. Very vividly, how they always go to like a high building, and he talks about suddenly they will fly out, and it's almost like he gets distracted suddenly by remembering these kind of images of the natural world, and it's obviously of
But it's
great
the
importance to him.
it's the physicality. So there's the bit where Monsieur Swan's coming in the garden, and he doesn't use the main bell. He uses the garden bell, tinkles, and that's the noise he associates, knowing that he's not going to get a good night kiss from his mother.
Yeah.
But he describes, I think off the top of my head, I think it's is it ferruginous? The metallic iron like tinkle is
Mm,
described. So sound is described vividly. The natural world is described vividly. The atmosphere at night, the moonlight, how the air feels are all described vividly. Taste is described. Music, sound is described.
yeah.
There's no sense that isn't used to describe. And I think it keeps nagging away at me. It's the way in which the modern life is not that sensual.
Yeah.
Modern life is much more hygienic in a certain sense.
Well, it's
You,
digitized in a way. It's
yeah,
simplified. It's codified it into noughts and ones. This kind of like, and it's like that link you sent me the other day about people wanting to return to a more analog life. There's obviously a point now we've reached where some people don't feel happy with the current technological state of the world, and they're looking for this. The term authenticity is so philosophically loaded. I think every philosopher's tried to understand what authentic is. I think Adorno is to me was one of the people who's really hit the nail on the head with authenticity. But if we just want to use it in a lay terms, people are looking for these authentic experience, these analog experience, and I think Proust has got such a knack for describing this. But I totally agree with you. We've lost or many people have lost this ability nowadays to experience that, to notice that, to be able to go outside and feel with those senses, because we're so glued to technology, so focused on the digital.
You how long? When did you leave the Isle of Man? If you don't mind me asking.
So I was there for 3 years. I moved when I was 16, so I did my A levels there.
Oh, right,
And
but
then
what I was asking was, yeah, I just wanted to know whether you'd had it, because for those of you who don't know, Stuart was originally born. You're born in the Isle of Man, weren't you?
no, born in Yorkshire,
No,
North Yorkshire. So yeah, I live. My grandparents from Middlesbrough, which was in the North Riding of Yorkshire when they were growing up. I was born in a place called Gisborough in North Yorkshire. It's next to the North Yorkshire Moors. And
right. So my question was going to be, you've had direct experience of the countryside.
I'm a country boy. I would say I'm a country boy. I mean, I'm living in a city at the moment, and I hate it. The city's great, but it's not being that close to nature. So yeah, I understand when I'm reading Proust, having grown up in a country setting, in a rural setting, I can relate to it. I really feel it. I can really understand it.
Yeah, and why I wanted to, I don't think he describes it in the early section. He does talk about the moonlight walk and stuff, but
Yeah.
one anecdote I can give you is I've been in my. It makes me sound weird, so be careful how I put this. But I once went through a phase where I was really into like high-powered torches.
Oh,
So
Paul,
I
I've
went
got some. I've
right.
got some good ones. I've got
Yeah.
some. Me too. I'm seriously obsessed with high-powered torches.
Well, I've got one. I
To
got
my
one that
wife's amusement.
it has a throw of 750 meters.
Is it
So
one
you
of the
put this
ones?
torch on, it doesn't look that impressive, but it's
Yeah,
all
but
about men and
it
length.
goes far.
But it goes
It really is.
750 meters.
Yeah,
So I can, annoy sheep 750 meters away.
yeah,
But what I was going to say was, this is all a long-winded way of saying, I live near a very large, tradition, like deciduous woods.
yeah.
And late at night, taking my dog for a walk, or dogs, I've experienced it's almost pure silence.
Mm,
And it's almost like an auditory hallucination when, if you're in a place where you can hear perfect silence
yeah.
and you can't hear anything at all. And then I heard one of the dogs snuffling because I thought temporarily I'd gone deaf.
Mm,
Because normally in modern life, there is this constant strumming of traffic or whatever,
yeah,
and there's light pollution. And there's diminishing parts of the world where you can actually just stand in complete silence and
yeah.
darkness.
There it is on the Isle of Man. There's these like dark night zones. They're basically for stargazing. There's uh, some places on the Isle of Man where you can go, and it's like you say, most of them are in plantations in forests, and you can go at night. You drive up there, and there's very rarely other people. You might find some other people with telescopes up there, but there's no planes going over. There's no boats. There's no traffic, and like you say, it's disconcerting at first because of the darkness, because of the lack of any auditory, I guess, like waypoints. But the more you go to these places, the more you kind of like experience this. It's almost. Try to think of the word to describe it. It's almost like a healing. I don't want to get into like kind of hippie terms or anything like that, but it's like you feel like this sense of calmness without this noise, without this stress of the noise. Um,
And why I wanted to talk about this was to try and make it relevant to the Proust. Is he
mm,
goes into Paris, so half the novel, or a significant part of the novel, is in Combray,
yeah,
but the majority of the 7 volumes are actually in Paris, and the depravity and the busyness. And I find that contrast interesting.
yeah,
When he said the quote I gave very early on about a dark place indeed, it's almost that the Combray brings out the darkness, the foundational element of childhood,
mm,
as some type of psychological non-place, and then the desires and all the things that happen in adulthood and all the things that happen to him and his relationship to desire progresses over time.
yeah,
So it's almost like the darkness that I've been rabbiting on about is almost like this foundational earth space.
mm,
And that just intrigues me because, again, it's there's room in this novel to experience both, whereas modern life doesn't allow it or
mm,
doesn't give any credence to it.
yeah. But what interests me is just to quickly tag on to that. What interests me is the desire people now have to get that. The desire people have to go back to that, either with it's country living or it's it's quitting the corporate rat race or something like that. There's almost like a feeling of like this isn't good for us. Modern life isn't good for us, and there's this. So in a sense, the desire is reversed in a sense where we're desiring something more primordial, something more simple, which I find really
But
interesting.
but do you think Proust mines that successfully
Uh,
in the
uh,
sense
uh,
that
At this stage, no. I mean, I would probably say at this stage, not yet. The position I'm at, because in a sense, you get a feeling that he has I wouldn't call it a reverence, but he's got this interest at this stage in the natural world. But as we get further into the novel, I mean, I'm expecting a contrast. From what I understand, reading ahead plot lines, I'm understanding there's going to be a contrast. I couldn't tell you at this stage whether he successfully does that or not, but the elements are there.
right? Because also when you mentioned the notion of objects, and I think to tie up this notion of objects and memory, do you remember the bit where he talks about going up the stairs when he's only allowed to kiss his mother in public, and he mentions the varnish, and it's this brilliant. It's the disappointment of not being able to get a good night kiss from his mother. The
Mm,
feeling is encapsulated in the smell of the varnish
yeah.
on the staircase as he goes upstairs.
It's almost like he's codifying the disappointment with the varnish. So then, in the future, every time he smells that varnish, he's going to think of that negative memory.
But again, I just think what that is an amazing way of describing how it's your early point you made about how memories are encapsulated in material things.
Yeah,
And it's not even a material thing because the varnish is just a smell. Yes, it's varnish on wood, it's a physical thing,
he's not looking
but
at the
it's the
object. Yeah,
smell. No, it's the smell that captures the memory
yeah,
almost in aspic.
yeah.
And I thought that was a brilliant way of, and that goes throughout again the whole novel, In Search of Lost Time. I think I actually prefer, there was for many years in English the translation was Remembrance of Things Past,
That's
which I
right.
think Shakespeare's Sonnet 30. It's a line from Shakespeare, and I actually think Remembrance of Things Past is a better title than In Search of Lost Time.
Yeah,
But that,
there was a reason why they changed that. I think there's kind of like a wordplay in the original title in French, isn't there? From what I understand, is you like temps perdu can be idiomatic in the sense of it's like time wasted. So it's not just like he's looking for his lost life. There's this idea there that he feels like the time is wasted and he's trying to get that back. There's that kind of disappointment, and I think that links in with the whole concept of desire as well. He's been pursuing things his life, and maybe when he's older, he realizes I've wasted my time pursuing desire. And how can I get my time back? What do you think about that? There's quite a lot of discussion about that, about the French title and the wordplay there.
yeah, and it's the inevitability. It's back to the concept of the way he writes his sentences. So for many people, reading 7 volumes of this stuff would be the ultimate waste of time.
Mm,
And it goes back to what I'm saying about darkness, lack of light pollution, lack of noise pollution, but also the mental space to do something that the rest of society considers to be a complete and utter waste of time.
yeah.
So, in search of lost time, I would strongly argue that I think I won't jump ahead and ruin the end for people, but basically, it's very clear at the end, given that the final volume is called Time Regained. It's this notion of looking back over a life. To what extent can you recover it in the form of memory?
Mm.
Time wastes, time passes, you can't stop that. But the question is, do you have any memories worth recovering? And all my points about it's why I'm obsessed by De Chirico, this painter, because of the atmosphere he produces. All these discussions about nighttime and nature, and then later on in the novel, I think it transposes into more into architecture and the sense of Venice and places like this.
Yeah.
The atmosphere or the music, this Venture, this piece of music that winds its way in and out of Monsieur Swan's life. These things that give us anchor points in our life, And it's the notion we talked before about habit. So if you have habits, is that a waste of time? Or is it something that makes your life feel comfortable?
Mm,
To when is a life too comfortable? And when is a life interspersed with memorable things, which the novel's partly about? But
yeah.
the memory that Proust seems to value, most often a piece of cake stroke biscuit dipped in tea.
Mm,
That's not a profound. And you could argue, well, wasting all afternoon drinking tea soaked biscuit stroke cake, what a waste of time. And yet
mm.
that might be the one thing you remember in 40 years' time.
It's like the profundity of the insignificant that you
Yeah.
find in there. It's like suddenly he becomes excited and he dwells on these very what we would consider to be insignificant, but he gives it such life and importance. But it's interesting what you say about habit. Is there's definitely, especially with the bourgeoisie background and the high society framing of a lot of the story, that he's almost questioning, like, we dwell within habit, we dwell within society. Going back to Heidegger, this would be the concept of das Man. But the true authenticity is when we break out of that, even just for a moment, and then we become an individual through, and we get to focus on our individuality, not us as being part of a big interconnection of habits. And I wonder at this stage, especially in the overture, I believe he revised the overture numerous times himself in different editions before his death. So this was obviously like the crux of his philosophy. He found this so important that he needed to communicate this right at the very beginning of the novel. That this really sets you up for the rest of the text. But you can definitely feel this contrast, this tension between habit and the individual self trying to break through these memories.
But could I ask you a direct question? Because you've done gaming, haven't you? I'm not even sure that's how you phrase it. Done gaming. Have you been a gamer?
Well, you when I was younger, probably, yeah, probably up till the age of about 16, I think.
Right. So you've got. So I'm only asking. I'm not trying to shame you, although
No,
that
no,
would be
no.
fun. But I've got zero experience. It's the type of thing. The one or two times I've tried some game through the TV or whatever,
Yeah,
it's to your point about wasting time.
yeah.
It feels empty, the time spent. So I once played some stupid game for about an hour, and afterwards I just had this feeling of emptiness. Where did that hour go?
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Whereas you read Proust for an hour, you're not the same person as you were before you started reading the Proust.
Yeah,
You've
it's a good point.
changed. And that would go to, given that we have a whole generation of kids who've been brought up online,
Mm.
where are they going to get? It's a genuinely pointed question, but where are they going to get the involuntary memories of the future? It's
It's
a
a,
bizarre thing if you think Proust can think back to his childhood, and
yeah,
it's not a totally autobiographical novel, but it obviously is slightly.
it's yeah. I would say it is.
Yeah,
Uh,
so
I,
if it's autobiographical, you've got memories of the Isle of Man, you've got memories of Yorkshire
mm,
because of time spent out and about. So
yeah.
have I. What happens to a generation? How do you create involuntary memories from an online life? Is my basic question.
I mean, that would be absolutely fantastic for some sort of scientific kind of investigation. I would say, obviously, when I was growing up, computer games were very simple. Kind of 2D. I mean, I remember playing computer games in an arcade, as in going to the arcade with a bag of 10p's on the seafront, and there was a grounding of the experiences, and you went with your friends. You were in a physical place while you're doing it. So I don't have the memories of what happened in the game. I have the memories of being in a place with friends. Going for a day out, taking the bus, which is quite interesting. But I think nowadays everything's at home. Computer games are at home. Computer games are online. But what would be really interesting is, I mean, computer games now, they're obviously 3D, they're obviously more detailed, and plots in games nowhere near the complexity of something like Proust. But it would be interesting to know what sort of involuntary memories, like you say, or what sort of memories in general do kids have of games? Do people go to sleep? Kids go to sleep and have dreams about Roblox or Fortnite or whatever game's popular at the moment. And will they remember those in the future? Will they be, when they're older, lying in bed in hospital when they're old and decrepit, remembering moments that happened in games? I mean, I would probably agree with you, Paul. No, they won't. They're throwaway memories. And that's
And even if
scary.
they do, yeah. So I think there's two parts to that. They may remember it, but it's an inherently shallow, empty memory,
Yeah,
or they're not going to remember it at all, which begs the question: what are they going to remember?
exactly.
And even little things. I make a joke if Richard comes on and we get to discuss it with him, but he has a filthy, filthy Kindle because he's always traveling the world and he can't lug books around with him, and it doesn't seem to bother him at all.
Yeah.
I would rather chop my own arm off than use a Kindle.
Mm,
And one of the reasons is I go back to reading a book, so I've got various editions of Proust. And I actually, ironically, given that it's about memory, I
mm,
wrote notes about the first 40 pages. And I was reading the notes I'd made in pencil 10 years ago.
yeah.
And I thought, what a prat. What a stupid comment.
Why are you underlining that?
But
Yeah.
it's my handwriting and it's what I identified.
Mm,
And my interaction with my own handwriting that actually reveals more of what you thought than if you typed it.
that's right. But you
All of
see a
these things.
progress. I mean, notes in books is a great example because you see a progress in your own psychological development. Like you say, you can see what was important to you at that time. Why have you underlined that? Why was that quote important to you then? And then you'll think, well, that's that quote. I understand it better now, or that quote wasn't important. This is new. So it's a, I guess, leaving a map or a breadcrumb of where you've been psychologically. Can kids do that in games? Can kids do that on a Kindle? Can you do that on a mobile phone? I think the experience is much different and much less involved, much less deep.
Have you got any? We might as well start winding up, but have you got any bits of the text you wanted to identify before we went? We can always pick this up next time.
No, I think we covered the bit about the lamp. I mean, I was thinking this magic lamp or kaleidoscope. I started thinking about Plato's cave. I mean, it has this kind of Plato's cave-like image in my mind of the lights on the wall. Uh, but I think he kind of reverses the logic of Plato in a way, because if you think in Plato's allegory, just for people who don't know it, you have this kind of setup where there's prisoners in a cave and they see shadows on a wall, and I think it's like a light projected behind them that casts a shadow on the wall, and they mistake those shadows for reality. And Plato is saying that the goal, it's almost kind of very, very matrixy. The goal of philosophy, or the goal of inquiry, is to leave the cave and see the real sunlight. So the torch in the cave and the shadows are not the true reality of real life. So you have this image of in his room.
Sorry to interrupt you there, Stuart,
Coming.
but it's important that. But why I think Plato's so bloody clever is the idea is that when you leave the cave, the person who manages to escape and leaves the cave is initially blinded
He's
by the
blinded by the
sunlight.
sun. That's right. Yeah, he can't comprehend. Yeah,
So
no,
a
that's a
you
good
can
point to
get
include.
which I'd link to the concept of desire, though. You can get too close to what you think you want, and then you
Yeah,
can't actually see it properly. But
yeah,
then also, so that's one thing. Then the question is, well, how long do you stay blind? But
yeah.
then when he tries to go back to talk to the other prisoners, he's not believed because they all think he's mad.
It's true.
So there's the downside of actually having experienced the so-called truth.
Yeah,
A, it's difficult not to be blinded by it, and B, even if you survive that, no one believes you,
no one's going to review about it. Yeah. Well, there's a in
which isn't
Zen
a great.
Buddhism. There's a similar concept in Zen Buddhism. It's not a koan. It's just a basic saying. Before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. So even though you become enlightened, you're this enlightened being, you still have the world to deal with. You're not suddenly you win, taken up on high or to nirvana or whatever. It's like you're still there, and it kind of links into that idea that you might become enlightened or think you're enlightened, but you sound like a raving idiot to other people, and you still have to chop wood and carry water. Um, but I think Proust inverts it a little bit, because he's saying that the truth here is not in the sense of the sun, in the sense of the light. It's kind of a subjective projection I put down. Like the truth is always going to be subjective, something that we project into the world, and it's not objective. It's not outside of our understanding. And a guy I read when I was 16 I was really into like counterculture, like California and San Francisco counterculture, and people like Timothy Leary and Terence McKenna, Alan Watts, and things like that when I was 16. And there's a guy called Robert Anton Wilson. I don't know if you've heard of him. He used to be an editor for
No.
Playboy. He was like a counterculture writer, but he worked as an editor for Playboy. And then he got really into this, acid culture and things like that.
Well, obviously, you only read Playboy for the articles.
Well, exactly. But Playboy used to be at Rolling Stone. Apparently, I mean, this is only from secondhand information, but apparently in the 60s and 70s, apart from the TNA, that there was some like philosophy and really interesting articles and writers and stuff. And this guy had this concept of reality tunnels. So he actually got the idea from a guy called Alfred Korzybski. He was like the general semantics guy. Who was writing in the 1930s, and he had this idea of reality tunnels where we can never know the totality of existence. It's a very Gnostic idea about the monad that I think Carl Jung writes a lot about. And he said everyone's in their own little reality tunnels, as in our self, our organism. It filters out information based on subjective preconceived notions. So everyone is walking around in their own little reality tunnels. It's quite depressing in a way, because there's no shared reality in a sense. Everyone has their own version of what reality is. Sometimes people group together, they connect because they have similar reality tunnels. Sometimes we just cannot communicate with people because our reality tunnels are so different, which I think is what's happening with politics nowadays, where we've lost the ability to connect with people and try and understand people and understand problems and understand what people's issues are. We're just so focused in our own little reality tunnel. It's like online bubble, I think you call it now. And yeah, I think with this idea of Plato's cave and where Proust is talking about this magic lantern, he's having a subjective experience based on the light. And in a sense, he's admitting very early. I think it's like page 10 in the book, where in my edition, he's admitting earlier on that all is subjectivity.
But to push back slightly on that, there is so much groundedness. So all the things I've been talking about, nature helps
Mm,
ground the subjectivity.
yep,
So his whole family share the country walks. The whole
yeah,
family, his grandmother's obsessed with the garden. The church at Combray, all these places of architectural, and the architecture, the stained glass windows, the sculptures inside, even the flowers on the altar, they're all grounded aspects of reality that help structure the subjectivity you're talking about.
yeah,
But we don't even have that groundedness now. We have more threats to the subjectivity. There's more disparate subjectivity. There's more alienation, isolation. But I think one of the
mm,
takeaways from the beginning of the book is the kid, no matter how whiny and moany and mommy's boy, he's grounded in his reality.
yeah,
Even when he's having the magic lantern that you're describing, he's having that experience, but he's experiencing it through the characters of the story. And that story has been handed down through time in his local culture.
yeah,
It's my point about cultural memory. I think a large unacknowledged aspect of In Search of Lost Time is the cultural memory.
yeah,
It's what literate, artistic people shared through centuries of being French.
yeah.
And
There's
once you
a
lose touch with that,
Yeah, you become kind of discombobulated. I mean, maybe you're reading ahead, so I'll just check on there's a description when he's describing the church, the inside of the church. He describes it in very kind of mythical ways, like I think he talks about the fourth dimensional space, with the fourth dimension being time, as in the church building itself is a cultural memory of the area of the town. And probably if people don't know too much about church architecture, a lot of churches, especially Norman churches, are added to over the years, as in you'll have an original very simple building, probably from the 800s or 900s, which is then added on and then it's built upon. So he's talking about the church being an amalgamation of different architectural styles that is like the kind of encoded physical history of the area. So no, I think I would agree with you on your pushback there, Paul, for sure.
right? Well, what I will do, we'll carry on with this, and I'll announce to people which section. What I want to do each time is give people the maximum number of pages. We won't try and go beyond, so we're not jumping ahead of people. but at current progress, I don't think that's going to be a problem. But I think, for my standalone talk, that'll be the third week. I think I might look at, you've mentioned the Magic Lantern and Plato's Cave, but when he talks about his grandmother giving him photographs, it struck me as a way of talking
Yeah,
about Walter Benjamin's essay.
yeah, it's very important, that section, because i- she seems to do it intentionally, as in the idea of that the painting, even though it's not a facsimile of real life, it actually contains more important information. Is in a kind of a personalization of real life. So I think that would be really interesting to talk about.
Right, so everyone, what we'll do is next week we'll continue, same time, 6 o'clock, and we'll pick up where we left off, and we'll probably try to finish. We'll do some close textual reading, I think, a bit more next time, but we'll try and finish at very least, the first part, the overture, so that ends with the phrase "cup of tea." Um, what's that marked in your edition?
I think for me it's on page. I want to say like page 40. Da, da, da.
Right, I think what we'll do is we'll try at the very least to cover as much as when it says Combray 2.
Yeah,
So it's the end of the
48
Madeline
or
episode.
page 48.
Yeah.
Yeah, cup of tea.
But we'll do you want is that okay with you if we just do that? We'll do some detailed textual reading and we'll finish Combray 1. So then the next start of the 4 cycle will start Combray 2.
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay? So I'll just put that in writing so there's no confusion. So we'll just finish Combray 1, and then next time when we meet, so it'll be in, just to get my own head clear, next week we'll finish Combray 1.
Next
Then
Thursday.
I'll
Yeah,
do then the following Thursday I'll do a standalone talk with slides as I normally do on the channel. The following week after that, maybe the 4 of us, Richard Grannon, Darren, Stuart, and I, will just do a roundtable chat, or some combination of those people.
yeah,
And then the following week after that, Stuart and I will start another 2-talk cycle where we'll start with Combray 2.
yeah.
So
Perfect.
that all sounds very convoluted. But thanks for everyone who watched this, and we will see you soon. All the very best.